Senate Majority Leader and human turtle hybrid Mitch McConnell has recently been speaking out a lot against the level of pushback that Republicans have been receiving throughout the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation process, and I find this hilarious, seeing that he just blocked President Obama's Supreme Court nominee for more than a year, but he's going to complain about the pushback they're receiving. I mean, he's one of the biggest hypocrites in Washington, D.C., but thankfully he was actually called out for his hypocrisy in an interview on Face the Nation, and he honestly didn't know how to respond because Mitch McConnell, he'll just lie through his teeth on mainstream media when he actually does get interviewed by them, and they usually don't call him out when he just brazenly lies, but this time was a little bit different.
In the history of partisanship on the Supreme Court, your decision to block Merrick Garland is something they see as having kicked off a new stage in the partisanship associated with Supreme Court nominees.
Yeah, they don't know much history. You have to go back to 1880 to find the last time a Senate controlled by a different party from the president confirmed a Supreme Court justice to a vacancy created in the middle of a presidential election. They also conveniently forgotten that Joe Biden said in 1992, when he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the Democrats control the Senate, Republican in the White House. If a vacancy occurred, they wouldn't fill it. They also conveniently forgot that Chuck Schumer and Harry Reid, 18 months before the end of Bush 43, said if a Supreme Court vacancy occurred, they wouldn't fill it. Talk about hypocrisy.
Right. But, Mr. Leader, I don't think that's right. In 1956, Eisenhower nominated Brennan. The 84th Congress was Democrat-controlled. And also on the Biden rule, Joe Biden was talking in the abstract. There was no nominee was blocked, and he said to not have the nomination come up before the election, but that it could come up after the election. And so what Democrats say when they hear you doing this is they say he's creating new rules to essentially do what he wants to do. And as you've written in your book, The Long Game, when you do that, it actually hurts democracy.
Yeah, well, that's not at all what happened, John. You're completely misconstruing what happened. What I gave you is the history of this. I know the history of this. I've spent a lot of time on this throughout my career. What I did was entirely consistent with what the history of the Senate's been in that situation going back to 1880.
Well, I think the 1956 example, and also in 1968, later in the election cycle, when a Democratic president put somebody forward, the Republican leader worked with him to get that person a hearing and get him towards the Supreme Court, which is not something that you did. A vote at the time.
Then there was a Democrat. Then there was a Democrat in the White House and a Democratic Senate.
But the Republican leader at the time tried to help the Democratic president.
John, you are not listening to me. The history is exactly as I told you.
Well, we have a disagreement about the history, but I greatly appreciate it.
So that to me was absolutely great, and you can tell that a politician is stumped when they just revert back to the same talking point that they've already used 100 different times. Because what did he say when he was pressed further? Well, you have to go back to 1980. Stop. Just stop. Stop being a robot for just 2 seconds and answer the man's goddamn question. But Mitch McConnell cannot do that because he probably just memorizes these talking points. The Republican Party is very cohesive when it comes to messaging, and he just decided to spout that same bullshit line over and over again. But clearly, you were fact-checked, and you've been proven wrong. Someone in the mainstream media actually did their job and called you out on your lie, Mitch. And regardless of what he wants you to believe, what Mitch McConnell did in blocking Merrick Garland was unprecedented. And even if you don't like Merrick Garland, I know I certainly don't, it's still the principle of what he did. I mean, this is a new low. He refused to hold even a single hearing for Merrick Garland, let alone a vote. And now this asshole has the audacity to complain about the resistance that he saw from Democrats. What little of a fight that they decided to put up. Really? I mean, this guy's unbelievable. I can't stand him. Now, what he did, regardless of what he wants you to believe, is create a brand new standard. If there's an election year and a Supreme Court vacancy becomes open, sorry, we can't fill that seat until after the election. So, in the event that it's the 2020 election and another vacancy emerges on the Supreme Court, is Mitch McConnell going to block Trump's possible nominee then? Well, he was asked this very question on Fox News, of all places, and his answer was really telling.
When you blocked Merrick Garland's nomination from President Obama, you basically said that we don't do this in a presidential election year, and that we wait until the election, and then whoever the people choose, they get to pick the Supreme Court nominee. But what you just said now was it's a question of whether or not it's the party in control of the Senate is different than the president. The question I guess I'm getting to here is, if Donald Trump were to name somebody in the final year of his first term in 2020, are you saying that you would go ahead with that nomination?
Well, I understand your question, and what I told you was what the history of the Senate has been. You have to go back to 1880 to find the last time a vacancy created in a presidential election year on the Supreme Court was confirmed by a Senate of a different party than the president. That's the history.
So if you can't answer my direct question, are you saying that if Donald Trump...
The answer to your question is we'll see whether there's a vacancy in 2020.
But you're not ruling out the possibility, since you're the Republican majority leader and there's a Republican president, that you would go for and push the nomination of a Trump nominee in the election year.
What I'm telling you is the history is you have to go back to 1880 to find the last time a Senate controlled by a party different from the president filled a vacancy on the Supreme Court that was created in the middle of a presidential election year. That's been the history.
I swear to God, if I hear Mitch McConnell utter the words, "You have to go all the way back to 1880," I'm going to lose my shit. I hate how politicians, they have to stick to the same scripted line over and over and over and over. And if you ask them a follow-up question, they just say the same thing. Answer the fucking question. So essentially, he tried to dodge that question and be evasive, but when it comes to whether or not Mitch McConnell would, in fact, hold hearings and ultimately vote for a Supreme Court nominee in 2020 for Donald Trump, his answer was really telling in not answering. You're damn right he'd do that. But the question is, well, how did he justify that? If he previously said, look, we're not going to hold votes or even hearings for Supreme Court nominees until the American people have made their voices heard. We're not going to do this during election years. How would he justify it? Well, by moving the goalpost. Now, what he's saying is that, well, I actually only meant that you don't fill the court if there's a vacancy, if there's a different party in charge of the Senate. But if it's the same party that's in charge of the Senate as the president, well, then it's perfectly acceptable to fill that seat. So in the event there's a vacancy in 2020 and Trump names a new nominee for the Supreme Court, yes, we will vote on it because, well, we're part of the same party. So obviously, he's a liar. And by trying to create this standard that, oh, we can't nominate someone during election years, clearly he's gaslighting Americans, because even he doesn't buy into that, because he's already trying to twist himself into a pretzel and do mental gymnastics to justify what may be another Supreme Court nominee for Donald Trump. So understand that they've made it very clear, Mitch McConnell has made it clear that their party is going to play as dirty as they possibly can in order to get their Supreme Court nominees through. So what does that mean for the next Democratic administration? They've got to be dirtier. When they go low, you can't go high, you've got to go lower, because these are individuals who are ruthless and they're willing to do whatever they possibly can to make sure that they secure that majority on the Supreme Court. So when the next Democratic Party president is elected, that individual has got to be adamant that we move forward with a court packing plan. You add 5 more Supreme Court justices and make sure that they're all liberal. The Constitution does not stipulate the number of justices that are supposed to be on the court. So you make up a number, add more, and then you do what you can to codify legislation that stops Republicans from doing the same exact thing when they get power next time. It's dirty, but this is what they did. They brought it to this level of gutter politics when they decided to hold open a Supreme Court seat for more than a year. So now, what do Democrats have to do? They have to play dirty. And if playing dirty means that you look bad, but you're doing it in order to stop political violence against women and workers and marginalized communities, well, then it's well worth it to play dirty if it means going to bat for them. Because again, Republicans are the ones that drew first blood here. They brought it to this level, and now they're going to have to suffer the consequences, or they should suffer the consequences, rather, of Democrats playing dirty. Do I think Democrats would play dirty? No, I don't, because they have no spines, they have no backbones, but it's certainly what they should do if they actually want to protect the communities they claim to care about. So that's really all that I have to say about this issue. We have to fight fire with fire, and I think that there's very few Democrats that want to do it. Certainly, Chuck Schumer. I mean, have you heard anything from Chuck Schumer really lately? I mean, he's made a few statements on the Senate floor about the Brett Kavanaugh disaster, but I mean, he's not going on the Sunday shows, screaming from the rooftops that what they did is completely unacceptable. He's not a fighter. He's completely unfit to lead at a time when we need unapologetic fighters for the left. So the one last clip that I do want to show you of Mitch McConnell was one that kind of made me giggle a little bit because he was clearly triggered by a question that he was asked.
In the Alabama Senate race last year, you very quickly said, after Judge Roy Moore was accused of inappropriate conduct towards teenagers many years ago, you immediately said that you believed the women. Why didn't you believe Christine Blasey Ford?
I can't imagine comparing Brett Kavanaugh to Roy Moore.
What a triggered little snowflake Mitch McConnell is. So I have nothing to say about that. I think personally that it is acceptable for us to compare Brett Kavanaugh to Roy Moore, seeing that his party, they have no problem comparing gay people to individuals who commit acts of bestiality and pedophilia. That's what they do all the time. That's how they fought against gay marriage. Oh, we're going to extend marriage to pedophiles next? That's the argument that they made. So that's all I got to say. I hate Mitch McConnell. I think most Americans who are reasonable people hate Mitch McConnell, but I will say this. He's effective. And if we had a Democratic Party leader that was just half as effective and willing to fight for their values and party as he is, then I think we'd be in a different place. So, I mean, even if he's a horrible person, he knows how to fight, he knows how to destroy the opposition. We just need someone on the left in the Democratic Party, someone with power to do the same thing.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.